Good evening, good afternoon. It's afternoon, right? I'm Stesha Brandon, the Literature and Humanities Program Manager here at the Seattle Public Library. And as we begin today, I want to take a minute to acknowledge that we're on Indigenous land. Here in Seattle, these are the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. And we honor their elders past, present, and future, and we thank them for their stewardship of this land. I also want to take a minute to mention that, we're in a library, and so the library is a great place to find resources if you're interested in learning more about colonization and its impact on Native people and Native lands. Welcome to today's program, presented in partnership with the folks at Raven Chronicles. Now I am delighted to welcome Anna Bálint from Raven Chronicles, who's going to introduce the program. Anna.
Thank you, Stesha, and welcome everyone. It's great to see you here. I was kind of getting really nervous when I woke up this morning. After No Kings, I thought everyone's going to stay in and sleep in, but you didn't. I also need to acknowledge our sponsors before I begin. The Seattle Public Library, of course, and Stesha. King County Arts Commission, Seattle Arts Commission, Books for Prisoners, It's About Time reading series, African American Writers Alliance, Cascadia Poetics Lab, Richard Hugo House, Jack Store Productions, and La Sala. So thank you to all those folks. Today's event is titled BAM Books, What's the Story? And of course, the story that we're really talking about is what is going on with BAM Books nationwide. And we're focusing in on some specific books today as a way of kind of illustrating some of, the larger questions and issues and what's at stake. So this sort of nationwide banning of books in the last couple of years has just increased like wildfire, to use a nice used metaphor. And PEN America has documented no less than 23,000 book bans in public schools since 2021. Censorship, and this is again PEN America, censorship is being mobilized by groups espousing conservative viewpoint. Well, there's no surprise there, of course. But the thing that's really significant that we have to keep in mind, especially here in a state like Washington, where banned books, while it's happening and is increasing, is minuscule in comparison to places like Florida or Texas. But we would be fooling ourselves if we thought that, we don't really have anything to worry about here. I think it's essential that we view this as a nationwide issue and a nationwide assault on the right to read. And it's based on that Raven Chronicles decided to take up this campaign against banned books. A couple of specifics about the books most targeted, and this is probably something that most of you already know, that race, racism, people of color, gender identity, both whether it's women, LGBTQ+, disabilities, and other identity differences, they're all under attack. A book for me that kind of like really shone a light on just how both vicious and absurd this is a book that's at the top of banned children's books list a lot. Tango Makes Three. This is based on a true story. Penguins that you can go and visit in the Central Park Zoo, they're there. These two male chin-strap penguins who fell in love, went everywhere together, had this inseparable bond. And they built nests and put stones on it and wanted to have like the other couples did and have a baby chick appear. And it never happened. So the keeper who was observing all this there was one female penguin that couldn't handle more than one egg per year. And she laid two. So he gives one to the penguins to put on their nest. And they hatched this egg and raised it. And her name is Tango. And you can go visit Tango at the zoo. Tango makes 3. But that book is right at the top of banned books for children. So, of course, another issue that's kind of really hits the radar over and over again is sex. But sex of what kind? What are we talking about here? Believe it or not, it includes sex education books. But more ominously, it also includes all those forbidden topics of incest, rape, and sexual slavery. Things that have been just kind of like not addressed for years, but have impacted the lives of millions and millions, past and present, particularly women and girls of color, but also boys and people from all walks of life. But that's forbidden. So 2 examples of that is The Bluest Eye, which I'm sure everyone here is aware of and is, a classic, and Sold by Patricia McCormick, which is a book written for young adult audiences and addresses the issue of a little girl, I've forgotten the country, but she's sold into sexual slavery in India. And this is a book, again, intended for young adults. It's about their world. It builds empathy, it builds critical thinking. And that's really at the heart of it when you come down to what these books all have in common that are being banned, is that in one way or another, they're building empathy for people different from ourselves. They're also building and fostering critical thinking. So when you think about it in those terms, book banning at its heart is the banning of empathy and critical thinking. And then you put that in the context of the world as it is now, particularly in this country, and that's some scary stuff. The other aspect, other than empathy and critical thinking, is this thing about erasure. It's another aspect of what's going on with banning of books. It's erasure of identities, of lived experience, of history, and the lessons of history. Just think how dangerous that erasure is, and how vital the protection of those books are. Okay, so Raven Chronicles, in response to all of this, we launched this year-long campaign, which really started back in June, in defense of banned books and the right to read. We began with a series of podcasts of writers reading excerpts from and talking about banned books that are meaningful to them or are of historical and literary importance. And that is a series that is ongoing, and all the podcasts are available to see on Raven Chronicles' YouTube channel. So today's event is the first in a new series, a series that we wanted to be live and allowed in-person discussion and questions and interaction. So today we have 2 writers who each have a book that they are going to share and read from, and then we'll be opening up for discussion with the audience. Questions, concerns, whatever comes up. We want to get it lively. So before handing it over to Rena Priest, I just want to add one last thing, which I think is super important, which is that we also celebrate these books. We celebrate these books today that Nancy and Rena are going to talk about, and that we see that the importance of celebrating and treasuring these books that are being banned, because they are just that, treasures. So with that, I'm going to introduce Rena Priest. Rena, I'll just go read your bio. Rena Priest is an enrolled member of the Lummi Nation and served as the 6th Washington State Poet Laureate from 2021 to 2023. Her first collection, Patriarchy Blues, won an American Book Award. She has received 2 grants from the National Geographic Society and toured nationally with a variety show called Welcome to Indian Country, organized by Indigenous Performance Productions. Rena lives in Bellingham, Washington, and you can learn more about her at renapriest.com. Welcome, Rena.
Ait sgwan ysdalja, o helix yn chwanasat la tiakai, sa chwaltana, sa nasna, chachlamisan. Hello, everybody. So happy to be here with you today talking about banned books. So I am going to talk about this amazing book by Isabella Wilkerson called Caste. But first, I'm going to because I'm a poet, I'm going to have to talk about some poetry really quick. All right? And I'm going to start by reading a few quotes about banned books, just to set the tone. You should not be afraid of someone who has a library and reads many books. You should fear someone who has only one book and he considers it sacred, but he has never read it. And that's Friedrich Nietzsche. Don't think you're going to conceal faults by concealing evidence that they ever existed. Don't be afraid to go into your library and read every book. And that's Eisenhower. If all printers were determined not to print anything till they were sure it would offend nobody, there would be very little printed. And that's Benjamin Franklin. If we want truth, every man ought to be free to say what he thinks without fear. That's Erasmus. All these people talk so eloquently about getting back to good old-fashioned values. Well, as an old poop, I can remember back to when we had those old-fashioned values, and I say let's get back to the good old-fashioned First Amendment, or the good old-fashioned Constitution of the United States. And to hell with the censors, give me knowledge or give me death. And that's Kurt Vonnegut. The books that the world calls immoral are the books that show the world its own shame. Oscar Wilde. So those are just a few quotes about censorship. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about some poets who have been banned, starting with Baudelaire. He was charged a fine of $300 for one of his books, or 300 francs, and his book suffered from the controversy, becoming known only as a depraved pornographic work for necessarily leading to the excitement of the senses by a crude realism offensive to public decency. Too real. Baudelaire was too real. And then we have Gwendolyn Brooks. Her poem, We Real Cool, was banned. It's one of the most famous poems, and it was banned in schools in Mississippi and West Virginia in the 70s for the penultimate sentence in the poem, We Jazz June. It says the school districts banned the poem for the supposed sexual content of the word jazz. However, Brooks maintained that the interpretation was erroneous. And I'll just read that because it's a nice short little poem. We real cool. We left school, we lurk late, we strike straight, we sing sin, we thin gin, we jazz June, we die soon. So that's Gwendolyn Brooks, her banned, outrageously offensive poem there. And then we have Mahmoud Darwish, who in the year 2000, the education minister of Israel, surprisingly, suggested including works by Darwish in the school curriculum. But right-wing members of the government threatened to introduce a motion of no confidence, saying Israel was not ready to teach Darwish in schools. After Darwish learned of the controversy, he said, "It is difficult to believe that the most militarily powerful country in the Middle East is threatened by a poem." So what if those young people 25 years ago in the year 2000 got to read those poems, got to humanize their Palestinian neighbors in that way, right? Would the world be different? Which line was it, I wondered? I went reading Darwish's poems, and I thought, which line scared them so much? And I found this into a young poet. Deviate with all your might, deviate from the rule. And I thought, oh gosh, if only we didn't fear the literature, right? And then we have Nazim Hikmet, considered Turkey's greatest modern poet, was a communist who was stripped of his citizenship for his political views, and his work, which praised his country and the common man, was deemed subversive and banned in Turkey from 1938 to 1965. And when Hikmet was imprisoned for sedition in 1938, artists worldwide campaigned for his release, while Turkish citizens circulated petitions and organized hunger strikes on his behalf. He was released in prison in 1950. So he spent 12 years in prison for his beautiful, beautiful writing. And I'm just going to share a couple lines by him. His poem, How to Live. And this is from the third, section 3. This earth will grow cold, a star among stars, and one of the smallest, a gilded mote on blue velvet. I mean this, our great earth, this earth will grow cold one day. Not like a block of ice or dead cloud even, but like an empty walnut. It will roll along in pitch black space. You must grieve for this right now. You have to feel this sorrow now, for the world must be loved this much if you're going to say, I lived. So beautiful. So I think I just have a couple more to talk about. One is Federico Garcia Lorca, of course, one of the most important Spanish poets and dramatists of the 20th century, but his work was still subject to censorship in Spain into the early 1900s, and Lorca was openly homosexual and known for his outspoken socialist views, and his works were deemed dangerous for their sexual content, language, and political underpinnings. In 1936, and this is coming from the Poetry Foundation's website about Lorca. In 1936, Lorca was shot to death by Spanish nationalists due to his support of the deposed Republican government. Lorca's work was burned in Granada's Plaza del Carmen and banned from Francisco Franco's Spain. His books remained censored until Franco's death in 1975. So I went looking through Lorca, and I thought, what was it that was so upsetting, so horrific to people? It was so forbidden. And I found this, to find a kiss of yours. To find a kiss of yours, what would I give? A kiss that strayed from your lips, dead to love. My lips taste the dirt of shadows. To gaze at your dark eyes, what would I give? Dawns of rainbow garnet fanning open before God. The stars blinded them one morning in May, and to kiss your pure thighs, what would I give? Raw rose crystal, sediment of the sun. Outrageous, right? How could that be in the public where anyone could read it? My goodness. So, the poets. A couple others. I'll just say two more. One is that Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman was banned in Boston, famously, banned in Boston in 1882 for sexual content. Can you imagine not having this book because someone was like, I'm uncomfortable? I cannot even imagine. And then this one, which was like was hugely influential on my life personally. A Light in the Attic by Shel Silverstein spent 182 weeks on the New York Times general nonfiction bestseller list and spent 14 weeks in the #1 spot. However, Silverstein's books were accused of being not for children, encouraging bad behavior, and addressing topics some people deemed inappropriate for kids. Challengers at 2 elementary schools in Wisconsin said one poem encourages children to break dishes so they won't have to dry them. So it was so contended that it became number 51 on the list of 100 most frequently challenged books in the 1990s. And I'm just gonna read some of this outrageous content here. Put something in. Draw a crazy picture, write a nutty poem, sing a mumble-gumble song, whistle through your koem, do a loony-goony dance, cross the kitchen floor, put something silly in the world that ain't been there before. So I just love that, and I love it that he's saying put something in, don't take something out, right? Which is what book banners are trying to do. So yay, Shel Silverstein. So that concludes my little section on poets. And I'm going to spend a few minutes talking to you about this amazing book, Cast. I, in 2021, had the privilege of being named a literary lion of King County Public Libraries. And I got to go to their gala, and Isabella Wilkerson was the keynote speaker there. And I was just so enthralled by everything that she had to say. It was amazing. And I thought, okay, I got to go get this book. And I'm so glad that I got this book because it's just so full of powerful, powerful history that you probably have never been told and probably won't ever encounter anywhere else. And it was the subject of a book ban in San Antonio, Texas, along with 12 other books, and it ended up becoming a federal case was brought to have it reinstalled in the libraries. And so I'll just read a little bit of what she says about the book. She says, "When I was researching Caste, the origins of our discontent, I knew it would be eye-opening to many readers and hopefully transformative. But I would never have imagined that this book would be in the middle of a federal case involving a rural county in Texas where conservatives, some who didn't even have library cards, would take over the library board, remove books, including Caste, be ordered by a federal judge to reinstate the books, appeal that ruling rather than restore them, and consider shutting down the entire library system, just to keep you from knowing what is in this book." There were other books, but I really do think this was kind of the one that they went after the hardest, because there's some information in here that you all need, that we all need. So the federal judge in Texas ruled that at least 12 books be removed from libraries, many because of their LGBTQ and racial content. The judge ordered that they be placed back onto the shelves within 24 hours. And then this is because 7 residents sued county officials in April of 2022, claiming their First and 14th Amendment rights were violated when the books deemed inappropriate by some people in the community were removed from public libraries. And so I'm just going to read you a couple of lines from their lawsuit. So thank you for these 7 people, right? These 7 people were like, and brought this lawsuit. "The censorship that the defendants have imposed on our public libraries is offensive to the First Amendment and strikes at the core of democracy. The right to publish and receive ideas, even politically unpopular ideas or ones that some find offensive or distasteful, is enshrined in our Constitution. As the Supreme Court has said, freedom of thought and speech is the matrix, the indispensable condition of nearly every other form of freedom." So that pretty much sums it up right there, right? Thank you, First Amendment. And also, the First Amendment exists to protect unpopular individuals from retaliation and their ideas from suppression at the hand of an intolerant society. Defendants have admitted that they are banning books because they disagree with their political viewpoints and dislike their subject matter. So I thought that was really interesting. And then I'm just going to read you a few quotes from the book that I pulled out. First, this is also from the lawsuit that was brought by the citizens. They say, public libraries are not places of government indoctrination. They are not places where the people in power can dictate what their citizens are permitted to read about and learn. When government actors target public library books because they disagree with and intend to suppress the ideas contained within them, it jeopardizes the freedoms of everyone. So a few lines from Caste. This is, I think, probably some of what people were, so upset about. She says, Hitler had studied America from afar, both envying and admiring it, and attributed its achievements to its Aryan stock. He praised the country's near genocide of Native Americans and the exiling to reservations of those who had survived. And she talks about how, when, I shouldn't quote, I don't remember which of the presidents. So there was some big thing that happened in the United States that made people say, oh, we are at the peak of the refinement or whatever. And at the same time, our commander-in-chief rode a horse that was bridled with the flesh of human beings, of Native Americans that had been skinned and their flesh used for bridles for his horse. And how civilized, right? So this is in that book. People don't want to know this. People don't want you to know this. These things about our history. She also says, the price of privilege is the moral duty to act when one sees another person treated unfairly, and the least that a person in the dominant caste can do is not make the pain any worse. Outrageous. She says, in our era, it is not enough to be tolerant. You tolerate mosquitoes in the summer, a rattle in an engine, the gray slush that collects at the crosswalk in winter. You tolerate what you would rather not have to deal with and wish would go away. It is no honor to be tolerated. Every spiritual tradition says love your neighbor as yourself, not tolerate them. She says, we are responsible for our own ignorance, or with time and open-hearted enlightenment, our own wisdom. She says, choose not to look, however, at your own peril. The owner of an old house knows that whatever you are ignoring will never go away. Whatever is lurking will fester, whether you choose to look or not. Ignorance is no protection from the consequences of inaction. Whatever you are wishing away will gnaw at you until you gather the courage to face what you would rather not see. So she's challenging us there, right? See it. She says, dehumanize the group and you have completed the work of dehumanizing any single person within it. Dehumanize the group and you have quarantined them from the masses you choose to elevate and have programmed everyone, even some of the targets of dehumanization, to no longer believe what their eyes can see, to no longer trust their own thoughts. Dehumanization distances not only the out-group from the in-group, but those in the in-group from their own humanity. It makes slaves to groupthink of everyone in the hierarchy. A caste system relies on dehumanization to lock the marginalized outside of the norms of humanity so that any action against them is seen as reasonable. But she's talking here, I like this line that she points out, that dehumanization distances not only the out-group from the in-group, but those in the in-group from their own humanity. And she elaborates on that just beautifully in one of the sections of this book. So again, I just can't recommend that you all read it. Read it. It's so good. I can't recommend it enough, strongly enough. So I'll close with this quote. She says, our era calls for public accounting of what caste has cost us, a truth and reconciliation commission so that every American can know the full history of our country. Wrenching though it may be, the persistence of caste and race hostility and the defensiveness about anti-Black sentiment in particular make it literally unspeakable to many in the dominant caste. You cannot solve anything that you do not admit exists. which could be why some people may not want to talk about it. It might get solved. Just very thought-provoking, and thank you all so much for being here to participate in this wonderful discussion. And it's so important, I think, that, you know, as often as we can, we get together to celebrate our First Amendment right. So thank you, Haishka.
Oops. What did I do with my glasses? There they are. Yeah. Thank you, Rena. And it's amazing that you distilled such an incredibly complex and deep book. And also, I mean, you alluded to it in what you read, but the section, when it's not really a section, one of the focuses that is in that book, Cast, has to do with Nazi Germany. And when you read that, there we are. Then and now. Yeah. Okay, so I want to welcome Nancy Rawles, and I will get things straight in a minute. And Nancy is the award-winning novelist of Love Like Gumbo, winner of the American Book Award from the Before Columbus Foundation, and My Jim, a novel that brings to life the missing voice of the wife of Jim, a novel in the adventures of Huckleberry Finn. My Jim won an Alex Award from the American Library Association, the Legacy Award in Fiction from the Hurston Wright Foundation, and was selected by the Seattle Public Library for the Book of the Year in 2009. And that was for a Seattle Reads program, is that correct? In her New York Times review, Helen Schuman called My Jim as heart-wrenching a personal history as any recorded in American literature. Penguin Random House has just released a 20th anniversary edition of My Jim. Hooray, hooray. Congratulations, Nancy. And in addition to writing, Nancy has been a history teacher for many years. Her curious students have demonstrated the myriad ways history is important to them, their families, and the advancement of this country. For this, she is grateful. And in bringing Nancy up, I just want to say that it's so right that talking about My Jim follows your introduction to Caste, because it's like My Jim kind of brings to life what caste in this country historically has actually meant, as manifested in slavery, and through the personal experience and in the words of one particular woman. So welcome, Nancy.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you. I went to the march yesterday, and I know a lot of people did, and it was really, really wonderful to be there. It was so gratifying to have these tens of thousands of people in the streets just here in Seattle, and then millions around the country and the world. And there were a lot of great signs. And there was one I remember that said, what did it say? Ban fascism, save books. That was one of them. Yeah, they were really good. There was one that said, your voice is powerful. If it wasn't, they wouldn't be trying to silence you. Yes. So that one, really, really hit home. But lots of good sentiment there about just people, not wanting us to talk about things. So write about things, read things, but also just talk about them. And I think when you're told you can't talk about something, which of course This happens all over the world, as you pointed out, for different reasons. If you can't talk about it, then after a while, you maybe don't think about it. And that's kind of the idea, that maybe you shouldn't even think about it. It's forbidden to think about it. But there's also another way that works, because sometimes it's the only thing you can think about. Something that's forbidden, and it's in your body, it's coming back. You feel it, you're aware of it. I think that this is part of what's going on in this country. I think that the people who don't want us to talk about things can't stop thinking about them themselves. So they're trying to kind of exorcise them from the public view, and of course that doesn't work. Rena started out with some wonderful poetry, and I'm going to start with song, which is often the way that poetry is experienced in this country. And these are songs. It's 2 songs. I'm going to read from 4 different authors, and I'm going to start with a song from 1939. And this is a song that might be familiar to a lot of you. It was a poem written by a school teacher in New York, who he and some friends got it into the hands of Billie Holiday at a club, asked her to sing it, and it became a song that was widely known, and it was a song that was widely banned. Maybe one of the most banned songs with U.S. history anyway. So you may hear Billie Holiday singing this is Strange Fruit. Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black body swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolia sweet and fresh, and the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for a tree to drop. Here is a strange and bitter crop. The subject of lynching, if you haven't been to Montgomery, Alabama, to the Legacy Museum of the Equal Justice Institute's Legacy Museum, this is a museum that came about Brian Stevenson, who many people know, especially from the book Just Mercy and the movie Just Mercy. Part of the museum and the sites is a monument, a national monument to peace and justice, right? So this is, again, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission idea. And it is specifically to the victims of lynching. It's giving them the names and the places and the families, bring the families back with the jars, the communities collecting the dirt and the dust from these different places. I mean, this is a topic that you're really not supposed to talk about. You're not supposed to sing about it. You're not supposed to make a monument. And it's just a wonderful thing that all of that effort on the part for years and years and years and decades to privatize everything means that things like the Legacy Museum are private. So it can't be shut down like the Smithsonian, right? So there's an irony there. So that was the first banned words that I wanted to read. This other one, you also may hear somebody singing in the background. I think she was, 16 at the time. This is 1965, Society's Child by Janice Ian. Okay, so banned ideas, banned words, banned thoughts, banned actions. So this one, you may hear in the background, you might even want to sing it. It says, Come to my door, baby. Face is clean and shining black as night. My mama went to answer. You know that you looked so fine. Now I could understand the tears and the shame. She called you boy instead of your name. When she wouldn't let you inside, when she turned and said, but honey, he's not our kind. She says, I can't see you anymore, baby. Can't see you anymore. Walk me down to school, baby. Everybody's acting deaf and blind until they turn and say, why don't you stick to your own kind? My teachers all laugh. Their smirking stares, cutting deep down in our affairs. Preachers of equality think they believe it? Then why won't they just let us be? Sorry, I wanted to do the last verse. Let me see if I can get it. And then she says, they can't see us anymore, baby. But what she does with the last verse is she talks about the change that happens in her. One of these days, I'm going to stop my listening, going to raise my head up high. One of these days, I'm going to raise up my glistening wings and fly. But that day will have to wait for a while. Baby, I'm only society's child. When we get older, things may change, but for now, this is the way they must remain. I say, I can't see you anymore, baby, can't see you anymore. No, I don't want to see you anymore, baby. So I think that song, which was also widely banned, right? 1965, this is before Loving v. Virginia. I mean, this is interracial marriage is banned. So that whole idea of you're being told you can't think something, you can't do something, you can't say something, don't write about it, don't read it, don't watch it, and then having that message internalized. No, so now I also am going to participate in that because I'm just society's child, and this is not allowed, and I'm not able to stand up and say this at that moment in time. I also want to read from a couple of books, popular books that are banned, and again, these are things that you might know well, and you can, recite. You may actually remember quite well. This is from a story called The World's Greatest Fisherman. It's from Love Medicine. It's the first story from Love Medicine by Louise Erdrich. And here are the first few lines of it. The morning before Easter Sunday, June Cashbaugh was walking down the clogged main street of oil boomtown Williston, North Dakota, killing time before the noon bus arrived that would take her home. She was a long-legged Chippewa woman, aged hard in every way except how she moved. Probably it was the way she moved, easy as a young girl on slim, hard legs, that caught the eye of the man who rapped at her from inside the window of the Rigger bar. I'm going to read the end of that section, which goes like this. She had walked far enough to see the dull orange glow, the canopy of low-lit clouds over Williston, when she decided to walk home instead of going back there. The wind was mild and wet. A Chinook wind, she told herself. She made a right turn off the road, walked up a drift frozen over a snow fence, and began to pick her way through the swirls of dead grass and icy crust of open ranch land. Her boots were thin. So she stepped on dry ground where she could and avoided the slush and rotten gray banks. It was exactly as if she was walking back from a fiddle dance or a friend's house to Uncle Eli's warm, man-smelling kitchen. She crossed the wide field, swinging her purse, stepping carefully to keep her feet dry, even when it started to snow. She did not lose her sense of direction. Her feet grew numb, but she did not worry about the distance. The heavy winds couldn't blow her off course. She continued, even when her heart clenched and her skin turned crackling cold. It didn't matter, because the pure and naked part of her went on. The snow fell deeper that Easter than it had in 40 years, but June walked over it like water and came home. Part of why I wanted to read that is because of the idea, one of the ideas that I explore in my gym, which is about people who don't leave, basically, that people, ancestors, but also just very close family members who have gone before us don't leave. And I wanted to read that also, just to illustrate how powerful this book and this character is, even though this character, as you probably can guess, does not make it home, but is the kind of the impetus for the whole book. Okay. These are the first 4 lines from a book that you may also recognize. 124 was spiteful. Anyone? Willie? Yeah. Okay. So this is Toni Morrison's beloved, her famous first line. 124 was spiteful, full of a baby's venom. The women in the house knew it, and so did the children. For years, each put up with the spite in his own way. But by 1873, Setha and her daughter, Denver, were its only victims. This is a book that has been banned so many times in so many places for so many different reasons. And it ends this way. It was not a story to pass on, so they forgot her, like an unpleasant dream during a troubling sleep. Occasionally, however, the rustle of a skirt hushes when they wake, and she knuckles brushing a cheek in sleep, seem to belong to the sleeper, the knuckles. Sometimes the photograph of a close friend or relative, looked at too long, shifts, and something more familiar than the dear face itself moves there. They can touch it if they like, but don't, because they know things will never be the same if they do. This is not a story to pass on. Down by the stream in back of 124, her footprints come and go, come and go. They are so familiar. Should a child, an adult, place his feet in them, they will fit. Take them out and they disappear again, as though nobody ever walked there. By and by, all trace is gone, and what is forgotten is not only the footprints, but the water too, and what it is down there. The rest is weather. Not the breath of the disremembered and unaccounted for, but wind in the eaves or spring ice, thawing too quickly, just weather. Certainly no clamor for a kiss, beloved. I like that, the disremembered. This is the whole idea, right, with banning, is you're trying to take away power of words and language and ideas, thoughts, but you're also trying to take away memory. Maybe people won't remember about that horrible thing that happened to them or happened to them and their people or happened to people they don't know, but who they read about in caste, right? Maybe people won't remember. And I think, the whole point of story is to remember, right? That's why we write. That's why we put things down. It's to have that memory down. So I'm going to read a little bit from my gem, and I'll read a little bit about it, and then maybe talk a little bit about it here or just later on when we're talking. So this is a scene, and I think you'll understand it. The character of Sadie is a healer. So here's a scene. I take some mint from my pocket. Mass Stephen's eyes close, and he breathing hard. I puts the mint on his chest and backs away again. Then I hears his voice. Don't bring your dirty hands about me, gal. You've been rolling around in the dust. I comes in from the fields, Mass. I run straight here from the fields when they tell me you hurt. He tap his cane, and the old woman appear behind him. Take this dusty gal and wash her up, he say. I cleans my hands when the hot water come, I tells her. You go and see if it's ready. She hurry away. Mass raises cane like he's fixin' to strike me. I grabs it and tries to take it from him. He tap it on the floor, but nobody come. I peels his fingers from the handle one by one, each one burning with fever, but his grip still hard. He cussed me where he lay, never take his eyes off me. He burned them red eyes into me. I feels cold all over. I goes to touch his forehead, and he grabbed my hand, put his teeth on it, and bite down hard. I ain't dare scream, but now my eyes on fire. I grabs hold of the bottle and throws some whiskey on him. He cry out in pain, howl just like he human. But I knows better. Devil gonna howl if you get the best of him. I puts the bottle to his mouth and pours it down his throat. When the old woman come back, she find me sitting in her chair. She see there's something wrong, but she looked down. She got the water and some soap powder and paste. She carrying the fresh linen in her on her head. Her head slumped down. I tells her, put it all on the bureau. I got my hand in my pocket, touching my knife. I takes the water and dips a cloth in it. I presses it in my hands and dips it again. Whole time Mass Stephen staring at me. He looking at his teeth marks on my hand. He reach out and try to touch it. I pulls away. I cleans my wound before I cleans his. I tells the old woman to bring me some snake root. How much you want? Plenty to fill my bowl, I says. She makes her way down the stairs. You ain't gonna poison me, you black witch. What you need snake root for, Mass Stephen say. I makes you a salve with snake root to help bring the skin back together. I wants to see everything you making, he say. I ain't gonna take nothing from your hand. Why you call for me then, I says. I ain't called for no slave doctor, he say. Mass Watson sent you 'cause he ain't want me to die. He like having me next door. I'm worth more than any overseer to him. He ain't even got to threaten to save his slaves downriver. All he got to do is say he gonna sell them to me. He try to laugh, but he just hack. Mass Watson a good Christian, he say, praying for the devil. Think the devil got a soul. What you think? I says I ain't studying no devil. But if I ever does, I sure ain't gonna pray he live. I prays he choked to death on his own venom. This book has been banned. The students in my advisory, my former advisory, thought that was a cool thing, that the book had been banned. It was banned, from what I could tell, so it was banned in Florida and South Carolina and most recently the Navy Library. Okay, and I can, the reason that was given in Florida anyway was explicit sexual content, which is why a lot of these books are banned under that phrase, explicit sexual content. Everything I tells you happened long ago. Me, I remember it just like this morning. You want to know about things and why I keeps them close to me? I tells you if you listen. No need to write it down. So she's talking in this book to her granddaughter. And because this is based on oral history and talking, I think it's really important while we're talking about books to also acknowledge that a lot of the stories that we hold dear, whether they're individual or stories from our family, stories from our community, our people, are passed down speaking to listening. And that this continues, especially when books are banned and ideas are banned and thoughts are banned. This becomes hugely important, that those stories be told and that we listen to those stories and that we tell those stories. This book, My Gym, is a grandmother talking to a granddaughter, and a lot of times grandparents and parents don't talk to us, right? Because they don't want us to know about the horrible things that happen to them. They're protecting us, or they don't want to have to relive it, or both, right? They don't want us, I know my parents who grew up in the segregated South, there were things then would happen to us and we'd come home and we'd be perplexed or we'd be crying or upset or mad or whatever, and they'd say, oh yeah. And then they would tell us. It was kind of like, why did you send us out the door without this information? But it was because they were hoping things would be so much better that they wouldn't have to tell us certain things, right? So I think it's really, really important, especially now, that we talk to each other, that we talk to kids, that we talk to grandparents, that we hear those stories and pass on those stories, whether they're written down or not. There's just one other section I want to read. I'm not going to read the sexually explicit section. I'll save that for the students in Avery's class on Tuesday. But here's toward the end of the book. I can't tell you much about love. I can't tell you where to find it. When we colored got a price on our heads, some white folks treat us better than they do today, looking to keep us down every chance they get. Especially the colored men's and women's want something better for themselves. After Jim, I think nobody gonna ever loves me again, but Andrew loved me in his way, and Papa Dubin loved me, and my children love me, and you, Marianne Lieber. I the one who lost how to love. I tries to love Papa Dubin, he a good man. I tries to love my children. Your mama Elise and all them boys born of the cane, but I never shows nobody my first heart. They never seen the heart I was born with. It died a long time ago back in Missouri, back in the slave pen in St. Louis. Last time I sees my Jim. And this is the way the book ends. Everybody who love come back. Sooner or later they come for you. You feel their hand on your shoulder or their spirits in the room with you. Some sitting quiet, some raging, settling over you like dust. Sometimes it's their voice that come, the fingers pulling your hair in the night. I gives you my first heart, Marianne. The heart I gots from my mama and the heart I gots for my Jim. You show me my heart again when you ask me about my things, they spirits and things. You take that quilt wherever you go. When you old and war, you think on me and all the others love you. You close your eyes and feel our love coming up behind you. That's all you got in this world. Thank you.
So if Rena and Nancy, you guys want to come up here? Before I start with getting your questions and comments, Nancy brought up about the Equal Justice Initiative and the monument to lynching that's in Montgomery, Alabama. And I suddenly flashed on a story that I found on the Equal Justice Initiative website that Brian Stevenson told, that I think is a story that needs to be shared and shows the power of story, whether it be in books or verbally, and the breaking down of barriers between people. And this was about a woman who was digging the soil from her small community in Alabama, where a lynching had taken place of one of her ancestors way back. And one of the things Equal Justice Initiative is doing is, in addition to the monument, is also collecting soil from all these different lynchings and the names, if they're possible. So she's doing this by herself, and a pickup truck drives by real slow, and she looks up and she sees this white guy in the pickup truck. And she kind of watches, and he goes a little further, and he turns around, and he comes back, and she's thinking, oh, shit. But she keeps digging, and he gets out of the truck, and he comes over to her, and he says, excuse me, ma'am, can I ask what it is you're doing? And she explains how she's collecting the soil of where lynching took place, one of her ancestors. And she's taking it to the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery. And the guy says, would you mind very much if I help you? And she goes, no. So he's helping her, scooping up with his hands and putting it in. And he asks her the story, if she knew the story. And she's telling him. And she looks up at him, and he's got tears streaming down his face. They finish filling up this jar. And he says, so what happens now? And she says, well, I'm going to drive into Montgomery with this and give it to the Equal Justice Initiative. And he says, would you mind very much if I come with you? If I follow you there? And so he did. And I think, when you think how hard this country has worked to keep white people and black people apart, particularly, when you're talking about the rural South here, and what that story and that interaction represents. So I just wanted to mention that because I think kind of that's at the bottom, is what's at stake here, is that those connections that are possible cannot happen without being nurtured in some form or another. So without any questions, any comments, and I'm going to repeat them so that everyone can hear, and then Nancy, Rena, whoever wants to address it, okay? Yes, in the back.
What book are you concepts are you speaking about at this time? But not what book?
What book?
The title of your book.
Okay, Rena, did you want to talk about that? I think it has to do with caste.
One book title. Which one?
One book.
If it is.
Okay. So the question is wanting one example of one book title that we're talking about today. Yes, today.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right now. So in Caste, she does address lynching. And about my book. So my book, my new book that's on Raven Chronicles Press, which also, thank you, Raven Chronicles Press, yay, and Stesha, Seattle Public Library. Thank you, everybody who had an involvement in putting this event together. My book, Positively Uncivilized, is a collection of essays that mostly looks at our relationship with the natural world and how, in these times we think of ourselves as, at this time in history where we have artificial intelligence that supposedly can displace us from our jobs, but we're also using our drinking water to, cool those systems. It just seems very smart. So that's not in there because I kind of started thinking about this after this book was published. I just wrote an essay about water, kind of talking about that. But that's the type of thing that's in this collection of essays, looking at our relationships with the natural world and how it's in these times, not very smart. Not a lot of common sense happening with that. Yeah, so that's that.
Yes.
I was wondering, what kinds of suggestions can you give us to push back? Because there's so many things to push back. For example, I didn't even know cast was banned. Like my gym, like really? But what are some of the things that we can do?
Okay, so the question is, what suggestions are there for how we can push back against this situation? So,
Read a lot of everything. I was surprised, like when they told me that I was gonna, be part of this and to choose a banned book. I was like, oh, I don't know if I've ever read any banned books. And then I looked at the list and I pretty much only read banned books. So I was like, okay, all right, well, check. I got it. I got this. Now I just have to choose which one. So I think just read everything that you can, get your hands on, and share books with people and talk to people about what you're reading, because people love to hear that. It's great conversation, right? And then also it's an act of resistance. So that's perfect. It's fun, and it's grows us as people to read and absorb information this way, and it grows our community to talk about it. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, read the books, talk about the books. I love the example that you gave with the lawsuit and Isabel Wilkerson's reaction to that, but also that it was 7 citizens, was it? And I was thinking about it because I think it was in Texas. Yeah, my family's from Louisiana. I don't know, we have people here from Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, anywhere? Anybody? No, Alabama.
it's you, Willie.
Alabama, yeah, all over, okay. The reason I'm bringing that up is because the friends I know and family I know in those places in the South and in places in the Midwest, I've grown kind of soft. Because I've been in Seattle and LA, and even when I was in the Midwest, I was in Chicago. So, right? I mean, you meet people definitely in Chicago who will tell you exactly how they feel, right? And different parts of the South. But, I mean, the people I know in those places, they don't put up with stuff. I mean, it's amazing what they'll say to each other. And what they let people know, do not cross this line. They talk back. Like a lot. They sue, they do the whole, and it's really something. I feel like I've gotten, much, especially I guess, maybe here just much more, I don't know, polite and soft and mild and gentle and, try not to be too offensive and all of that. And man, my friends from Texas, do not cross them. Do not talk to them about a book ban or something. They will tell you where to go. I mean, they will tell you in no uncertain terms, and they will talk to you fast, and they will talk to you loud, and they will talk to you until you get some sense in you. Okay? So I think maybe that's something that I'm going to want to do, is I'm going to want to start being a little bit more forceful, I guess, in the way that I talk to people about outrageous things that are going on. I mean, it's just, it's outrageous. I mean, you would say it's unthinkable, you would say it's unfathomable, but it's not. It's all happening, and it's all been happening forever and everywhere. And I think it can be scary to speak up. It can be really scary to speak up. We've seen that. We know that. We know that reality.
Yes, Paul.
I have a question about a banned book that has a heritage of a banned book, the source of your book, Mark Twain. And I just wanted you to say something about what do you think about Mark Twain
I'm just going to repeat the question, which is Paul's asking that Nancy has a banned book that's based on or spin-off of a banned book. And so what does she have to say about that? So,
yeah, I think I can't say it anywhere as well as Toni Morrison has said it. She has a whole essay about Huckleberry Finn and about the importance of Huckleberry Finn because it is our history and it is our society and our culture. And I think she called the last 40 pages of Huckleberry Finn like the worst 40 pages in American literature or something because, it's Huck and Tom are playing around with Jim and putting him back into captivity. I think Mark Twain was a political writer, at least when he started out. He was writing because he had really strong opinions about things. He was writing about the police beating up Chinese people in San Francisco. And San Francisco high society didn't like it. And he got kicked out of the parties and he got fired from the newspaper. And he ended up writing the way that we know him for, right? But I think he was still saying things in some of his essays. And Huckleberry Finn is written kind of as Reconstruction's ending. It's written over a number of years, but it's as Reconstruction is ending. And I like to think of it, I think of it in a lot of different ways, but one of the ways I like to think of it is this idea of us being in the boat together, or on the raft together, floating down the river to freedom, but oops, missing the turn. Okay, this is Huckleberry Finn, right? So you're going down the Mississippi to Cairo, and it's Cairo, not Cairo. You're going down the Mississippi, and you need to hit the Ohio to go into free territory. But they keep traveling down, so they're going back into slave territory, which is, I think, what he's basically saying as a country that we are doing, that the United States is doing, going back into slave territory. And when Huck and Tom are effectively, torturing Jim in the end of the book, I think this is what Twain is also saying, that Jim is free. Jim is free. And this wanting to re-enslave Jim, wanting to, of course, with Reconstruction, this is what happens, right? To go back into that and to go back into the history. That we have these people now who that's what they want. These are the people when students would ask about, how could they do that? And these people and the Nazis and the whole, I'm like, those people are here. They're around. They may not be like right here where we are right now, but they're around. And when you see people just marching and talking about how they admire these people, or to see Hitler and the Nazis studying the U.S., South Africa studying the U.S. and the segregation system, and there are a lot of people. If slavery in the United States had to be ended by a vote. Really? What? It's crazy that it was a war, but if it was a vote, if the popular culture people had to vote to end slavery, I don't know. Really. So, anyway, I think Huckleberry Finn is really, really important. And other books that I took my Jim inspiration from were the slave narratives, which I think everybody should read, and of course were banned in their time. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl was in a concentration camp. His book, Man's Search for Meaning, was really important to me when I was writing. So Twain, I kind of start in Twain, but it's really the voices that aren't there, the missing story. Yeah.
Other questions, comments? I know you guys are sitting on stuff. Well, I'll have a question, which is one of the things that's happening in this country right now that is inescapable is ICE. And what's happening to immigrants and the whole attitude towards immigrants, including people who look like immigrants. I have 2 Native American grandsons who are named Carlos and Antonio. I read the other day about someone who ICE picked up because his last name didn't sound like an American last name. So, just even what kind of name you have connected with what color skin you have. So, this is a huge, huge assault. So I guess my question for Nancy and Rena is what role or what connection is there between that and banned books?
So I think that, so in the book Cast, she talks about the dehumanization, right? Like you have to dehumanize somebody or a whole group. It's easier to dehumanize a whole group because if there's someone sitting across from you and they're crying real tears and they're a real person and you can see them as a human being, then you can't do the terrible things. You can't rip them apart from their children and send them off to, some unknown camp somewhere to maybe never be heard from again. Like you can't do that if you recognize their humanity, and it stirs something in you. And so what has to happen is you have to just like dehumanize a huge swath so that you can lump people together and then you can say this one, they're one of them, the othering, And so if that means like by name, by skin color, then that's what they're doing. I think it has what that has to do with banned books is because when we read, we can put ourselves in the point of view of another person. We can have empathy in ways that that go above the physical description of somebody. They're human. You're in their interior. You have access to what they're thinking and what they're feeling and what their personal histories are. And then you can't dehumanize somebody. And if you read a lot and you have enough of these viewpoints, then it just becomes completely impossible to see another human being as anything but another human being. And then when you learn science and you learn about, the interior lives of the habits of animals and other beings, then you can't do the things to animals or other beings. You can't take their habitat and destroy their habitat. So it just goes on and on and on. The deeper your knowledge about anything, which a lot of that is going to come from reading, then the deeper your connection to it, you become more invested in it. You become a part of that world. You care for it. You love it. You can't abuse it or destroy it because you recognize that that's part of yourself. And so banning books is just a way of cutting us off from our own humanity, I think. And so we shouldn't do that.
Yeah, I liked what you said, Anna, in the beginning about empathy. I'm thinking about banning empathy and what you just said, Rena, about that. I think the stories that we're seeing playing out are the stories, again, these are stories that go back all throughout history and all throughout the world. Masked men grabbing people off the street, throwing them in vans, disappearing them effectively, right? Jelani Cobb, I think it was, who wrote about the two Americas. Victoria, you might remember this. It was a New Yorker article when he was writing, it was George Floyd and George Floyd's America, you know, and he wrote a description of this kind, right? Like the maskmen, the whole whatever, and that if this is taking place in another country, we go, oh, those people in that dictatorship, right, over there. And Jelani Cobb was basically saying, yeah, the America I'm living in is not the America you're living in. You know, it is a different country. What you said about Darwish was just, that was incredible. That whole idea, what would it have been like if in 2000, students in Israel, on the instruction of the Israeli Minister of Education, were reading those books, were reading those poems, were reading those words. Would that have made a difference? It might have. You know, I mean, there's the empathy, the other point of view, the opening up. So I think that, you know, when you're talking about banning books, you're talking about banning stories, you're talking about banning people, you're talking about turning your back on humanity, you know, on the mothers, on the kids, on the people being torn apart, on the people being criminalized. You know, this is the thing, and I think this is something I'm so glad you did cast, because all of these things were and are, quote, legal, you know? So when we say we're a country of laws, I always appreciate that on the one hand, because I kind of, you know what people mean by it. But on the other hand, I think, well, that works in all kind of ways, right? Especially if you're talking about the laws. I mean, there were laws that you couldn't teach a black person to read, right? This was a crime, teaching somebody to read. So there are all kind of laws, and whether they're legal or not, you know, what was it? And we were in, so Julia and I, Julia's my partner there, Wave. We were in Hannibal, Missouri when the book came out for the 20th anniversary. And we were in Hannibal. We're invited by someone who runs a museum there called Jim's Journey. So if you go to Hannibal, if you go to Missouri, if you go to St. Louis, you go to Chicago, drive the River Road to Hannibal and go to Jim's Journey Museum, which tells the local history of all the black people in that area. Faye Dant, who grew up there, it's her museum. And she has a poster that says, like, the Holocaust was legal, slavery was legal. What else? All of these things. I will sometimes say to students that there have been, you know, times in this country around where murder was legal, rape was legal, incest was legal. It just all depended on who you were doing it to, you know. So the fact that we're here in our nation of laws, and this is how the law is being used to carry out, you know, kidnappings, and to carry out this kind of family separation, this kind of cruelty. I think that in some ways, books can't even touch on it. I mean, we try in books, right? You try to write about these things, and it's really important, and it's really important for people to read and read about them. But just as writing is an act and reading is an act, I think we have to do stuff. I mean, we just do. We just do. And that doesn't mean that I really know, you know, so much of what to do. But being in the streets, you know, that means something. It means something. So we have to do what we can do. And I think reading and writing are hugely important, but in some ways, I'm going to say something sacrilegious here, in some ways I think they're the least of it. In some ways, they're the least of what we need to be doing. So, there.
I will say, too, that it wasn't until 1978, with the signing of the American Indian Religious Freedoms Act, that Indigenous peoples of the United States got the right to sing and dance in our traditional way. And a lot of those stories and traditions and that Indigenous knowledge was carried on our songs and in our stories that were expressed through our spiritual practices, through our songs and dances. And so in a way, from an oral tradition, that is book banning. That's like a huge, banning of transmission of intercultural knowledge and the relationships that sprang out of those, learning those practices. So for, I don't remember what year it went into place that it became illegal for Indigenous peoples to sing and dance in our way and celebrate our traditions. But it wasn't until almost my lifetime, it was like 6 months before I was born that we got the right back to do that. And before that, to sing and dance in our traditional way meant that you could have your children taken, you could have your ceremonial homes burned, you could have all of your regalia, your sacred objects destroyed. You could go to jail. Many did go to jail for honoring and observing our customs and sharing these stories. And so the transmission of knowledge, it is deeply threatening and dangerous to power structures that want to, subdue people and the will of the people for whatever reason. This is why they outlaw songs and dances. This is why they murder poets in the streets. This is because you can't suppress people when there are people singing bravely. And so I think that writing and reading is doing something too, though. It's not maybe marching in the streets, but it is like captivating the minds of the people so that the people can march in the streets and feel like they have something to stand up for that they value. So
I just wanted to add that one thing I think needs to go alongside all that, and does, I think, spontaneously, is the act of witnessing, and how powerful that is. And I mean, you only have to look at what's been happening in Gaza, where the witnesses, journalists and medical staff in particular, have become targets. The other piece, though, that goes with all of that is that when, somewhere in what I was reading for this event, I came across this thing about, the teenager who gets told you can't read that, who immediately finds reason to sort of sneak that away and with a flashlight to make sure to read it. And I think there is that basic instinct of when you get told that something, is off limits, it's for your own good, there's a piece that sort of kind of rises up inside people. And that's something, I think, in terms of pushing back, that needs to be fostered. Just in conversation and whatever opportunity comes our way. Yes?
I'm just curious about, from your perspective, Nancy, and Nina, your point of if the Israeli students would have learned more, even in our blue state of Washington, as a teacher, do you think we're not teaching the right history? We're we spent a whole year in 6th grade learning about ancient civilizations when that time would have been better spent learning about Indian schools, Japanese internment, or what's your kind of feeling in is there a movement? And part 2 is, as a teacher, can you bring in current events into your classroom, or is that too controversial to bring in current events like ICE, or just what's factually happening?
Tell me if I'm getting this right. At the heart of this question is kind of what is our opportunity and responsibility as teachers in terms of what we bring into the classroom and how much we go by like set curriculums versus things like what's going on in Palestine today or whatever. Does that kind of get to the heart of it?
Yes, and I'm curious factually, like, are you tied by our state superintendent, the curriculum that you have, I mean, are we doing the wrong thing by having too much time being have to be on ancient civilizations
Yes.
and not on these other things?
I would say yes. I think, okay, because, so coming down, I was talking with my friend here who is also a writer and a teacher at Western Washington University, and we were talking about what we learn in school. And I remember one time I was contracted, just when I was first starting out as a freelancer, I was contracted to write curriculum for a private school so that they could be in compliance with the time immemorial law. Because by law, schools are required to teach Indigenous history. And so they contracted me, and I was like excited. They're like, we want to do this in our own voices. It's like this initiative where Indigenous people will write about Indigenous history, and so you're our gal. And I was like, all right. And so they send me what they want me to do, and I was like, oh no. And I did it because I had already signed the contract and I kind of needed the work. But then afterwards I felt so yucky because what it was I had 1,000 words to write for 7th graders on the Dawes Act, the Indian Relocation Act, the Stevens Treaties of Washington State, the Native American Journalism Association's identification of how Indigenous peoples like to be called, either by our names or Native American or Indigenous peoples, the role of Indigenous art in inspiring the Seahawks logo. There was like a whole number of things, right? I had like this laundry list of things. I had to define sovereignty for 7th graders and all of this in 1,000 words. So I did it, and then they said, do you want a byline? I said, please don't put my name on this. This is erasure, and I don't want to do the rest of this contract. So like I quit basically. And I felt very uncomfortable about that because I was like, what if I'm alienating work here, right? But then the very next day I got another contract and it was really good. But that is the bare minimum to like comply with the state of Washington's mandate that you teach Indigenous history. And I remember when I was growing up, we spent like maybe a day talking about Indigenous culture and history, and it was like, oh yeah, they thought the cedar tree was sacred, and they thought the salmon was sacred, and that's all they had to eat, and they made baby diapers out of the inner bark of the cedar tree, and so the other kids were like, oh god, yeah, baby diapers out of cedar, it's like, this is just like ammunition to just treat us Native students like trash because we were so uncivilized, because they spent an hour talking about that's all we had. And it wasn't until I became a full-grown person after school, after I had a master's degree in everything, and started going out looking on my own for what life and the absolute wealth and beauty that is here and in our culture, the way that we lived in the seasonal round, it's called. So flourishing without agriculture, but just, traveling with the harvest and understanding the landscape in such a way that it was like what is now called permaculture, I guess. But we did it, naturally and in tandem with our cosmology. And so, nothing like that is ever taught. And what is taught is so, like, it's almost demeaning the way that it's taught, disregarding, the richness of it all. So I think that if students did learn things, and also I'll just wrap up, but I remember one time I was giving a reading and this woman came up to me afterwards and she said, thank you so much. I'm trying so hard to learn because I was not given an opportunity to learn anything about Indigenous peoples. I grew up in California. I went to elementary school in the 60s, and we were taught that there were no Native Americans anymore. And I remember, and that like really got to me because I remember in the 1st grade when we lived in Yonkers and I was in graduate school, my daughter was in the 1st grade in Yonkers and they had a cultural heritage day. And, they're like, oh, I'm Italian, I'm Irish, I'm this, I'm that. And Leela was like, I'm a Native American. And her teacher, Mrs. Sardi, was like, oh, honey, there are no more Native Americans anymore. And so Leela came home, obviously upset, and she's like, Mom, am I not really a Native American? I was like, Leela, yes, why? And so she tells me this story. And then, you have to pick your battles. Like, do I go and talk to this teacher? Or do I just accept that I'm like, several thousand miles away from home trying to do graduate school and raise like a first grader and just tell her, like, of course you're a Native American and, like, deal with it on our own. So I think that it's deeply important that the education about who we are as a nation happens in our institutions at a young, before people graduate from graduate school. Because, we spent a whole year on ancient Egypt. I knew how to design a Senate game. I couldn't tell you how that's played or what that is relevant to at this point in my life, but, there you go, so.
I've taught for a long time, and I taught for quite a while as a writer in the schools. So I would, go around and work with wonderful people, like Victoria there, Cleveland. So we would do things often in a humanities way. And the interesting thing, I don't know if I should name the school or not. Okay, Denny Middle School. It was a long time ago. Who knows what they're doing there now? But it was 7th grade, I believe. And what they were supposed to learn about was China, Mexico, and Africa. I mean, what's wrong with that picture right away, right? China, Mexico, and Africa. So they met with me about coming in. They said, okay, well, you're going to do Africa. We already did China and Mexico. It's spring. You're going to do Africa. And I said, okay, that's fine. I'll do Africa. That sounds great. So I say to the teacher, okay, well, what I would like to do is I would like to do African literature and have the students read African literature, and we'll talk about it and analyze it and talk about the themes, and then we'll write on those same themes. Short stories, plays, whatever, scenes, And the teacher goes, African literature? There's literature in Africa? And I'm like, yeah. And here are the writers we're going to do. Here are the writers, here are the books, So I share with them these different writers. We look at different chapters, poems, et cetera, et cetera. And there's one book by Mariam Abba, Senegalese writer. Where's that? There you are. Yeah, Mariam Abba. Mariam Abba had a book called So Long a Letter. Little tiny book, and it was a woman writing to her best friend. So this was a woman who was trying to raise her kids on her own, and her husband had taken a new wife. There's all this stuff going on in this book, and they're writing. And the teacher, after she heard like a snippet of this book, and we did a little class, said, I want to read that book. And I said, sure, borrow it, read it. And the teacher also had teenage kids, totally identified with the book. And the thing about it that was so wonderful with these artists and ed programs, these writers in the schools programs, is that you get to introduce people to books that they get to go out and read on their own. And this is a lot of what teachers do, and a lot of what good teachers do, and what good teachers have always done and do even when they're forbidden to teach. In Florida, in places, they're still teaching, a lot of teachers. And part of what they do is they just put the books in the students' hands, right? So they make sure whatever it is that you're teaching and learning, and that you've only got 1,000 words and it's crazy, right? That you're saying to the students, oh yes, and here's just a fraction of what you could know. And look, I've brought these other books for you. And let's go down to the library. you know? And one of their stories, gotta let these people get up. But anyway, one of the quick stories. So I'm in LA. My dad died. I went down to spend some time with my mom, and I needed to sub. So I sub in the LA public schools. And I'm on the yard, you know, doing yard duty or something at this one school. And this kid comes up to me and he goes, "I can't find that black boy." And I said, wow, okay. What is he talking about? You know, am I supposed to know him? Did I send him to look for somebody? Like, does he think I'm another teacher? Like, I mean, what's he going to? And he's upset because I'm not getting it, you know? And he goes, "I can't find that black boy, that book that you read. Remember you read that book in my class?" Of course, I had him once, right? "You read that book in my class?" And he said, "I went to the library to check it out, and I looked for it and I couldn't find it." And I said, "Oh, that's because somebody else had checked it out. You keep looking. You're going to find it. You know, you keep looking and you read that book," right? And he was a 6th grader. So I think that's a lot of what we do as teachers, even when we don't have the time or we don't have permission, you know, or we're trying to do the curriculum, that we put the books in their hands or bring them in.
Speaking of time, I think we're probably out of it.
I will say too, really quick, that my daughter in the 6th grade, or maybe it was the 7th grade at Whatcom Middle School in Bellingham, had a teacher named Mr. Zurcher, who will live on in everybody's memory for being glorious. But he had them play the roles of people in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So they had to take on a role of a leader. He assigned them, and then they had to argue, they had to debate. So they had to understand the whole thing. And so that was good. She'd come home all the time talking about it. And he passed away a few years ago from cancer, but there were so many people that went to honor his life because, you know, he took so much time and care with the kids to make, you know, in a sensitive way, to make them understand things about the world that they were living in. So.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. Thank you especially Nancy and Rena. But even though this part is over, there is still Raven Chronicles books and other books over there. So take a look, purchase. And some of them may be banned.
Thank you all so much. Just as we're closing today, I just wanted to leave you with a few resources for folks that were wondering about what you can do if there's an action you can take around banned books. The American Library Association has information on their website about book bans and the rise in book banning. So you can go to the American Library Association's website to look about that, learn about that in more detail. There's also PEN America has a lot of information on their website about book banning. And then for those of you who don't know, the Seattle Public Library actually has a program called Books Unbanned, where we support youth from all over the country can get a digital library card and essentially check out books from our collection using that library card. And so we just passed, I think, over 1 million checkouts just like last month. And these are folks, we're hearing from these folks that they're ages 12 to 26, and they're getting access to books that they cannot get access to in their home states. And so the library has that program. You can support that if you are so inclined, and there's more information about that on our website. So those are just a few little pieces of information there. Oh, and I'll also mention George M. Johnson, the wonderful writer of All Boys Aren't Blue, which is the #1 most banned book currently in the country. George has a new queer rom-com coming out, so fun, and is going to be here at the library on December 6th. So if you wanna celebrate that, that'll be fun. Thanks so much to our friends at Raven Chronicles and all the folks who make today's program possible. And Rena and Nancy are going to be signing books, so get your copies and get your books signed. And thanks to all of you for coming out today.